Hi, so I thought in this video I would go through the process of marking a short answer response and just tell you what I'm looking for, the sort of things I would give feedback on, and how I would grade a short answer response. And this just might be helpful just so you can get an idea of how I do things to see, maybe you're looking for the same type of feedback. And what I've got here is this is not a student answer. This is an answer that I wrote that kind of reflects the common way that students would answer this question, and you might even see that it might look pretty familiar. The question here, the short answer question, is explain one ethical consideration related to studying the brain and behavior. Now this is a question more for the new syllabus than the old one. If this was the old syllabus, it would say related to the biological level of analysis. In the new syllabus, they're a little bit more specific, or they might be a bit more specific at this stage. So let's have a look. I think ethical considerations, this type of question is the hardest one for students to answer. It is really tricky, and this is why I think this is a pretty prototypical, stereotypical, archetypical answer. It's a pretty typical answer that students would give. All right. Anonymity is important in studying the brain. In SM study, they conducted lots of tests to find out the role of the amygdala in fear. All right, so now the first thing I'm going to say to the student is, and I'm an English teacher here, I'm going to say, for the love of God, please use paragraphs. Right? Don't lump it all in here. Separate your points out with paragraphs. Have a really short introduction. What's the consideration? What's the study? What's the issue? Argument, study, conclusion. Right? So that's the first piece of feedback I'm going to give. Now, this answer, in the beginning here, what I'm really looking for is that they can make the connection between anonymity and the topic, why it's important in the topic. And so they've identified the consideration, anonymity, that's great. And they've identified the study, that's also good. Here they attempt to make the connection and give a reason why it's relevant. Anonymity is important because they were studying someone with a damaged brain. Then they get into the summary of the study from here all the way down to here, right? So to me, this doesn't show a lot of understanding about the ethical consideration. You could argue, if you like, you'd say, look, there's no definition of anonymity. Whether or not, if you're someone that likes to have key terms defined in there, to me it depends on the context, depends on the term. But there's that reason is just way too vague. It's way too general. And students do this all the time when they just, here's a consideration, bang, here's my study. And so they've got all this description of the study. And SM's one that kids love to remember because it seems pretty anecdotal, and it's almost like a story it's very concrete. They find it easy to remember and tell a lot of details. And what I'd be saying to them is, this shows good knowledge of the study. They summarize how they went to the haunted house. They compared their reactions. But when you're talking about ethics, it's really the methodology has to be relevant to the consideration. And so, yes, it shows good knowledge of the study, but is this all really relevant to the concept of anonymity? And then that should, if it is, then it has to be explained somewhere. So let's just look at what happens after they summarize the methods of the study. They concluded it plays an important role in the fear, which helps to show local. I'm just laughing at myself. I'm reading this as if it's someone else. This is me marking my own work, pretending it's another student. Anyway, they play an important role in fear, which helps to show localization of function. In conclusion, anonymity was important in the study because studying the brain is sensitive. So we come back to this explaining the consideration. They've got a little bit more detail here. It's sensitive, studying the brain, but again, way too vague, right? So it's almost like a whisper, a hint of understanding, but it's just, there's not enough evidence here to show that they really get what the issue is and how it's shown in the study. Right, and so this is a common thing I see in ethical consideration answers. You go consideration, study, whole answer about the study, and a one-line conclusion, and it's just not enough. So the feedback that I would be giving my student here, if when I see these types of answers, I thought I did a better job of spacing this out. I'm sorry. Right. Well, they did what? They identified the consideration. Good job. And the study, and they summarized the study, albeit a little briefly. It could have been in more detail. And they did attempt to explain why it's relevant. They made an attempt. That's good, right? So we've got to give credit where it's due. But the big thing that this answer is missing. They needed to explain in more detail why it's relevant. And when we talk about ethics, we're looking at, okay, what is the consideration? And usually it's a guideline, right? Informed consent, right to withdraw, anonymity. And we're looking at why is that consideration relevant to the topic? And usually the why is how does that consideration reduce the potential negative effects of the study? So, for example, if we're looking at the SMK study, we're saying anonymity is important because she has a rare genetic disorder. If her name is published, she might be the source of unwanted attention. The media might be interested. Those are the types of reasons. That's the depth of explanation, right? How that anonymity is going to be important to protect our participants, to reduce the possible negative psychological or psychological effects of the study. And so that's what I'd be really telling the student. You have to elaborate on that. And I think there was a lost opportunity here in this instance specifically to explain how the consideration was applied, right? They didn't even point out that they used their initials. They didn't publish their full name. That was how they followed the anonymity. It was just kind of implied there, and that was a missed opportunity. Use paragraphs. And I would also say a lot of students, when they talk about ethical considerations, if the question's saying related to one study, that's fine. Focus on one study. But if it's general, like the brain and behavior, they should write about it generally. To show that they have a range of the methodology used to study the brain and behavior, not just they had the understanding of that one study. And so, right, what would I give this on an IB rubric? Let's look at the old one first, for those, just so we know. Now, it's definitely not in the top band, right? Because there's no understanding of the research that's not linked. Focusing, the effective, right? It's not. I don't think it's in the bottom band. And the reason for that is there weren't too many inaccuracies, and I wouldn't say it's marginally relevant. I think they did make a genuine attempt. So I do think it's in this mid-mark band. It is partially answered, right? It showed anonymity, made an attempt. Knowledge and understanding is accurate but limited, and I think it's very limited, and so that's why it's towards the bottom. So I'm definitely not thinking 6, I'm thinking 4 or 5. The command term, what does that mean? Go away command term. It's not sufficiently explicit. That's the key here. Right, so I would be giving this a 4 out of 8, right? That would be my grade. I think, and again, this is where I think there'd be some IB examiners going, no, it's not mid, it's a 3. I'd be surprised if anyone was saying it was a 6. So you're going to have a range here of about 3 to 5. I would be giving it a 4. Now for the new response, the new rubric, it looks pretty much the same as the old one. Right, okay, so I'm saying it's definitely not in the top. Because I don't think it addresses the main topical problem. It's the research is not explicitly linked to the question, so we rule out that one straight away. And then we look to the the response is relevant, yes. Doesn't meet the demands. What was the demand? Explain, give a reason, right? So it does, but not quite. Knowledge and understanding, accurate but limited. Yep, definitely, it fits that. It's supported by research which is described, right? The research is not explained. It's not linked to the question. Response of limited relevance only rephrases the question. No, I don't think that's an apt description, really. It's mostly inaccurate or not relevant. No, I think it's mostly accurate, but just limited. That's the big problem here. It is relevant to the question, so I don't think it fits that. So I think we're seeing it's not on the bottom band. And so once again, I'd be giving this, what's interesting here, I'm giving it a 4 out of 9. So in the old syllabus, actually this would have done better than in the new syllabus according to this new rubric. I mean, that's just the way the cookie crumbles, I guess, but I would be giving this a 4 out of 9. Again, I would be telling my student, look, you've got the consideration, but you just need to elaborate on the explanation of how it's connected to the topic, and also elaborate on the explanation of the study, how that study is supporting that particular ethical consideration. Both of those things were too vague. All right, so I hope that was helpful. And so just, again, generally what I'm looking for in answers is I want a really good explanation of the topic. Without mention of the study, really good. In this case, what's the ethical consideration? How's it relevant to that field of research? Maybe 3, 4, or 5 sentences. And then looking at the study. And at the end of the study, I want an explanation that links it back, shows here's how that study demonstrated the ethical consideration in this example. Hope that was helpful. If this is, just let me know, and I can do this with other types of short answer responses and also for essay questions. So, cheers. Happy marking.